When I first bought my camera a couple of years ago, I went to Flickr and I scrolled through photos that I liked, and then I tried to guess the camera settings they used, and then afterwards check if I was correct or not. And I think that's a good exercise for you to get better at understanding what shutter speed, aperture and ISO does. When you walk around doing your street photography, you don't have the time to fiddle around with your camera settings all the time. You want to set it and forget it, and today I'm going to share you my best settings for street photography. Most modern cameras, like the one I'm shooting with, which is the Fuji X-T3, they have this custom shooting mode where you can decide your maximum ISO and your minimum shutter speed, and those are the two ones we need to configure. In daylight, like it is right now, I use these settings you see here, which is a minimum shutter speed of 250 and a maximum ISO of 1600. This tells my camera that no matter what I do, never go below 250 of a second in shutter speed and never go above 160 in ISO. And all the photos you see here are shot with this exact setting. The shutter speed determines for how long time your camera lens will be exposed to the light. So the faster the shutter speed you have, the faster it will snap a photo. So if you're photographing people or movement in general and you want to freeze that movement, like this guy walking between these two trains, then you want 250 of a second or even faster, because you want to snap that photo and you don't know when he comes and you can't really plan for it. So that's why in my custom settings I have 250 as my minimum shutter speed when we're in broad daylight. In terms of ISO, you would want to keep that as low as possible, but I also want my camera settings to be flexible to wherever I go. So if I'm in a mall for 5 minutes and want to take photos in there, I can do that. If I'm in a subway, if I go up to the broad daylight, whatever I do, I want to be kind of flexible. So I put a maximum ISO of 1600, so no matter what I do, my camera will never go above that. Alright, so now we have set our shutter speed and our ISO range, so we don't have to worry about those two things. And that's the idea here, to worry as little as possible about your camera settings so you can focus all your attention on actually taking the photos, observing what's around you, and get a decent photo. The only thing we haven't talked about is the aperture, and that's actually the only thing that I think about once I take my photos, because it controls the depth of field in the photograph, or how much of your photo is in focus and how blurry the background is. So when I walk around and do my street photography, the aperture dial is the only thing I'm usually touching, because that's going to be different from photo to photo. In some cases I would like to have everything in focus. In other times, like doing street portraits, I might want to have a blurry background. But my shutter speed and my ISO can usually just be automatic. That's basically it. Having these settings with a custom menu with a minimum shutter speed and a maximum ISO, and you controlling the aperture, that's kind of all you need, especially in the beginning if you're starting out, and then you can get more comfortable and confident in that, and then you can adjust it as you go. But these are a good starting point. But there's one more thing I need to address, and that's something that took me a lot longer time than it should to learn, and that's how you understand how the camera will expose for certain scenarios. So most photographs you will take, especially in broad daylight, they will have a dark part and a really bright part, also known as the shadows and the highlights. So when you take your photograph, you can either point towards the darker side of the image or the brighter side. And depending on what you choose, your camera will pick different camera settings for you. Because if you point towards the dark side, then it will try to expose the darkness. Let's say you point your camera towards the darker side of the image, the shadows. Then your camera will compensate and try to expose that part properly, which in theory sounds fine. The problem is that the camera settings, the camera will choose to expose the dark side correctly. It's gonna blow up everything in the bright part, because the bright is so much brighter than the dark part. Does that make any sense at all? When I decide what I expose for, I usually pick the brightest side of the image, because that keeps it, I think, a more natural look, where the bright is bright, the dark is dark, compared to exposing for the dark part, and then you get this all blown up bright part. I'm never gonna get through this fucking video, man. But it is very important to get right. So next time you're out, try to take the same photograph one where you expose for the shadows, one where you expose for the highlights, and then you can see the differences yourself. When I don't shoot digital and I shoot with my film camera, I have a video about that over here, and I put a link in the description as well. Then I actually expose for the shadows, because it seems like film has an easier way to handle overexposure compared to underexposure. So in film, it's vice versa. Oh, and I forgot to mention this, in terms of my focusing mode, I usually shoot single point focus because I think it's more reliable. I think manual focus takes too long for me. I think continuous focus is just unreliable, and yeah, I like single point focus. These are the camera settings I use like 70% of the time when I'm out shooting in broad daylight. In low light situation, it's a little bit different, but I think I should make like a whole new video about how I do it in low light, because everything in low light is a lot more difficult. If you shoot with a camera that doesn't have these custom menus, first of all, try to make sure, like really sure, it doesn't have these menus. Ask a friend who owns the same camera as you, or ask the internet. And if that's the case, then you can go with like aperture priority maybe, or shutter priority. Both of them I think are fine to work with. And like the most important thing is you pick one and then you get comfortable with that one. Once you're comfortable with that one, you can mix it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick tutorial, and if you want to see more of those, then just comment below. Let me know which one you would like to see, and I'll make them for you. Remember to subscribe, because in 2 weeks I'll have a really cool video out.